The train did not simply stop. It sighed like something tired of moving forward. The iron wheels of the Union Pacific ground against the frozen tracks, and the sound echoed across the white emptiness of Wyoming territory. For Miriam Dubois, that sound meant the end of everything she had known. Cheyenne was not the city promised in the advertisement. It was a handful of wooden buildings crouched against a sky the color of steel. Snow covered the ground in uneven drifts. The wind moved across the plains without mercy, sharp enough to cut through wool and bone. Miriam stepped down from the train alone. She carried one small carpet bag. Inside were 2 dresses, a worn Bible, a bar of lye soap, and 73 cents. That was her whole life now. The other passengers stayed on the train. The porters threw down mailbags and hurried back inside. No one looked at her twice. The engine let out one last whistle before pulling away, leaving her standing in the cold silence. She had expected someone. The advertisement had promised a kind rancher, a steady man seeking a wife to build a future in the West. She had imagined a nervous smile, maybe even flowers. There were no flowers. 10 long minutes passed before she heard the crunch of wagon wheels on packed snow. A buckboard came around the side of the depot. The man driving it did not look hopeful. He looked carved from leather and iron. He was tall, broad across the shoulders, his coat dusted with snow. A low hat shadowed his face, but she saw the scar running from his eyebrow down his jaw. His beard was rough, untrimmed. His eyes were pale gray, cold as the winter sky. He did not smile. He simply stared at her. Her heart began to pound. "Mr. Thorne?" she asked softly. He tilted his head once. "I am Elias Thorne," he said. His voice was low and rough. "And you are Miriam Dubois." "Yes, sir." His eyes moved over her face, over her coat, over her skin. The moment he understood, something shifted in him. Shock. Then something harder. He took a step back. It was small, almost invisible. But Miriam felt it like a slap. He had not known. The advertisement had not mentioned she was a black woman. "There's no one else?" he asked, still scanning the empty platform. "It's just me." He turned away from her and pressed his forehead against the flank of his horse as if steadying himself. The wind howled between them. Finally, he faced her again, expression locked in stone. "Get in the wagon," he said. It was not an invitation. It was an order. They rode through town without speaking. A few men standing outside the saloon watched them pass. Their eyes followed her slowly, curiously, judging. Miriam lifted her chin and stared straight ahead. She had been born free in Philadelphia, educated, raised with dignity. But she knew that in places like this, dignity meant nothing. Once they left town, the wind struck like a fist. Snow blew sideways across the open land. The sky and ground blended together in white blindness. The horses strained against the drifts. Elias did not speak. 5 hours in silence. 5 hours of cold seeping through her boots and into her bones. When they finally reached the ranch, Miriam saw a small log cabin tucked against a rise of land. A barn. A corral. Nothing else for miles. Isolation pressed in from every direction. Inside, yet the cabin was one room, a hearth, a table, a bed, a cot near the door. Elias lit a lamp. "There's been a mistake," he said quietly. Her stomach tightened. "The advertisement," he continued. "I didn't place it." She blinked. "My brother did. Jacob." Her fingers tightened around her bag. "Where is he?" Elias stared at the fire. "Dead." The word fell heavy between them. Cattle thieves. 3 weeks ago. Miriam lowered herself into a chair, but she had crossed 1,800 miles to marry a man already buried. "I never got the letter sent to cancel the ad," Elias said. "I was busy digging a grave." The wind rattled the cabin walls. "You can take me back in the morning," she whispered. He gave a humorless laugh. "That's a blizzard outside. You step into that alone, you won't make it a mile." She realized then she was trapped, not by him, by winter. "You can have the cot," he said. "There's beans and flour in the pantry." No warmth in his voice, no welcome, only survival. That night, she lay fully dressed under thin blankets. She heard him moving in the shadows. He did not lie down. He sat in a chair with his rifle across his lap, watching, not with hunger, with caution. 3 days the storm kept them inside. 3 days of silence and necessary work. Firewood, water, food. On the 4th morning, when Elias reached for the water bucket, Miriam grabbed it first. "I'll go," she said. "It's 10 below. I have hands." He studied her for a long moment, then stepped aside. By the end of the 2nd week, they moved around each other like 2 wounded animals sharing the same shelter. She cooked. She chopped wood. He repaired fences and tended animals. One night, a scream tore through the cabin. It was hers. Elias was beside her instantly. She thrashed in a nightmare, blankets twisted around her body. When her nightdress slipped from her shoulder, yet the firelight revealed something that made him freeze. Scars. Thick, raised scars across her back. Not one. Many. Old whip marks. He pulled the blanket back over her gently. "Who did that?" he asked quietly. She wrapped her arms around herself. "It doesn't matter. It matters. I survived," she said. "That's what matters." Something changed in his eyes. He no longer saw a mistake delivered by train. He saw strength carved by pain. And for the first time since she arrived, yes, the cabin felt less like a prison, and more like a place where 2 broken souls might survive the winter together. The blizzard did not leave quickly. It settled over the valley like a heavy hand, sealing Elias Thorne and Miriam Dubois inside the small log cabin for days that felt like weeks. The wind screamed around the walls. Snow buried the barn halfway to the roof. The world outside vanished. Inside, survival became routine. Elias rose before dawn to break ice from the water bucket and feed the animals. Miriam cooked what little they had, stretching beans and salt pork into meals that felt almost warm. She swept the floor. She patched his coat. She worked as if the cabin were already hers. At first, Elias barely spoke. He moved around her like she was something fragile and unfamiliar, something that did not belong in this land of mud and frost. But that changed the day she picked up the axe, when he stepped out of the barn and stopped when he saw her in the yard. The axe rose over her head and came down clean through a thick log of pine. She did not swing wild. She swung true. He walked closer, watching. "You ever done that before?" he asked. "I kept fireplaces burning in Philadelphia," she replied without looking at him. "If the fire died, I paid for it." He studied her stance. "Leave the knotted pieces for me," he said quietly. Yet it was the closest thing to praise she had heard from him. The nights were harder. When the wind died and silence filled the cabin, their ghosts grew louder. One evening, while Miriam shelled dried beans near the hearth, she began to hum. It was soft at first. Then words followed. "Precious Lord, take my hand," her voice filled the cabin. Rich, steady, stronger than the storm outside. Elias stopped cleaning his rifle. Don't stop, he said, eyes closed. My mother used to sing that. She looked at him differently after that. Later that night, he spoke of the war, a boy he shot near Vicksburg, a freckled face calling for his mother in the mud, a memory that would not leave him. It should have been me that died, he said. Miriam shook her head. You were just a boy too, she answered softly. The sin belongs to the war, not to you. For a long moment, he only stared at her. No one had ever spoken to him that way. A few days later, the sun finally broke through the clouds. They worked in the barn, repairing a weakened beam in the loft. The wood gave way without warning. Elias kicked the ladder aside and threw himself toward her. The heavy timber crashed down where she had been standing seconds before. They fell together into the hay. His body covered hers. He had his arms locked around her. Are you hurt? He breathed. No. They stayed like that too long. Dust floated in the air between them. His face was inches from hers. The lines around his mouth softened. His hand rose, slow and uncertain, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. Her body went rigid. Don't hurt me, she whispered. The words cut him deeper than any knife. He pulled back immediately, scrambling away as if burned. I ain't that kind of man, he said hoarsely. She saw it then. He had stopped. He had chosen her safety over his own desire. I know, she answered, voice trembling. That night, something shifted between them. It was no longer just survival. It was trust. A week later, the thaw began. Snow melted from the roof in steady drips. The creek roared alive again. The valley breathed. And then trouble arrived. A supply wagon pulled up one cold afternoon. Jed Miller, a heavy man with mean eyes and a mouth that never stopped chewing tobacco. He looked past Elias and saw Miriam standing in the doorway. Well now, he drawled. Didn't know you ordered yourself something special, Thorne. Elias's body went still. Jed grinned wider. How much for a turn? The world froze. Before Miriam could step back, Elias moved. He grabbed Jed by the coat and dragged him off the wagon seat. The big man hit the snow hard. You will not speak that way in my home, Elias said, voice low and deadly. Jed swung. Elias ducked and drove his fist into the man's gut. Then another punch to the jaw. Jed crumpled. You tell anyone in town, Elias continued, standing over him, that Miriam Dubois is my wife. You say you met Mrs. Thorne. You understand? Jed nodded, spitting blood into the snow. Elias kicked his rifle away and sent him off. When he returned inside, his knuckles were split open and bleeding. Miriam said nothing. She brought a bowl of water and a strip of linen. She knelt in front of him and cleaned his wounds gently. He watched her hands. He had no right, he whispered. No, she answered softly. The fire crackled. The cabin felt smaller than ever. She leaned forward first. The kiss was slow, questioning. He did not rush her. Later, when they stood together again in the quiet cabin, she placed his hand against her cheek. This is my choice, she said. That night, when fear rose in her voice and she whispered, Wait, you're putting that inside me? Elias froze instantly. He did not move. He waited. He let her see his eyes. He let her choose. When she nodded, he moved gently, carefully, reverently. It was not hunger. It was healing. And for the first time in her life, Miriam did not feel owned. She felt safe. Spring did not arrive softly. It came with mud and noise and running water that tore through the frozen earth. The valley changed color. Had white turned to brown. Brown slowly turned to green. The ranch came back to life. Miriam planted seeds beside the south wall of the cabin, where the sun stayed longest. Beans, squash, peas. She pressed each one into the soil like she was claiming ground that had once rejected her. "If we don't plant," she said, brushing dirt from her hands, "we don't harvest." Elias stood behind her, quiet. "We," he repeated. The word felt different now. They worked side by side every day. Fences were repaired. The barn roof was patched. The cattle were counted. The small ranch that had once felt like a grave began to feel like a home. Then the past returned. A rider appeared one afternoon. He wore a long, dusty coat and a smile that did not reach his eyes. His name was Silas Croft. He asked for water. Then he said one word that made Miriam's blood run cold. "Philadelphia." He pulled a folded paper from his coat. $500 for a colored woman named Miriam Dubois. Stole jewelry. Ran off. The world tilted. He stepped closer. Elias stepped out from behind the cabin with a rifle already raised. "She's my wife," Elias said. Croft laughed. "That ain't legal." "It is here," Elias answered. Croft left that day, but he did not give up. A week later, Miriam walked into the marshal's office in Cheyenne alone. Mud clung to her boots. Her back was straight. "I am Miriam Dubois," she said. Before the marshal could answer, Croft entered behind her, chains in his hand. Then the door burst open. Elias. Mud covered him from chest to boot. His eyes burned like wildfire. He was not alone. The town preacher and the general store owner stood behind him. Elias threw a paper onto the desk. A marriage certificate. Signed. Witnessed. Dated weeks before. "You forged it!" Croft shouted. The preacher cleared his throat. "I performed the ceremony." The store owner nodded. "Well, I witnessed it." The judge arrived. He read both documents. The wanted flyer. The marriage certificate. "In this territory," the judge said slowly, "a married woman's legal matters belong to her husband." He looked at Elias. "If there is a debt, you will pay it." Elias did not hesitate. "I will." Croft's bounty vanished in that moment. Miriam stood beside Elias as the judge declared the warrant void in Wyoming. For the first time in her life, the law did not chase her. It had stepped back. They rode home in silence. That night, fear returned. "You forced my hand," Miriam said quietly by the fire. "I saved you," Elias answered. "You lied." "I would lie to the whole territory again." The silence between them trembled. She realized something then. He had known about the flyer long before Croft came. She had found it hidden in his drawer weeks ago. A letter he had written to cancel the advertisement the day after she arrived, and a wanted poster with her face on it. He had known. He had chosen her anyway. "I am not your burden," she whispered. "You are my life," he replied. She studied his face in the firelight. Not pity, not ownership. Love. Hard. Defiant. Willing to fight the world. She stepped closer. "This time," she said softly, placing her hand over his heart. "I choose you." And this time, there was no fear. Summer came. The garden grew thick and green. A chicken scratched in a small pen Elias built for her. The cabin smelled of bread and wood smoke. Neighbors began to visit. Some came to stare. Some came to trade. A woman from town brought Miriam's sourdough starter wrapped in cloth. "No home is a home without this," she said. It was acceptance, a small beginning. One evening, under a sky washed gold by sunset, Elias took Miriam to the oak tree near the creek. They carried a granite stone together. He carved his brother's name into it. "A Jacob Thorne," a good brother, a man of hope. Miriam placed her hand on Elias's back as he worked. The past was no longer a ghost. It was honored. Late summer brought a violent storm. Lightning split the ridge. Wind tore through the pasture. Cattle scattered. They ran into the storm together. He roped horses. She turned cattle back toward the canyon. Rain soaked them. Thunder shook the ground. They did not break. They moved as one. When the storm passed, they stood in the barn, it shaking and laughing like children who had survived something wild. He pulled her close. "You gave me something to live for," he said. "You gave me back my name," she answered. Autumn settled gently over the valley. One crisp morning, Miriam tied a blue silk ribbon into her hair. Elias had bought it in town for $2, a foolish luxury. But when she turned toward him wearing it, mud on her boots and flour on her hands, he looked at her like she was the finest lady in the territory. "My wife," he said proudly in the general store that week. Not quiet, not ashamed. My wife. Winter returned, but it felt different. The pantry was full. The woodpile was stacked high. The fire burned bright inside the cabin. One night, as wind howled outside, Miriam sat near the hearth mending his coat. Elias cleaned his rifle, and he set it down, held out his hand. She went to him without hesitation.